The hospital lights flickered as though even they felt the weight of the moment. A billionaire, known for his power and pride, sat helplessly in a sterile white room as a doctor delivered a sentence no amount of money could erase. His only daughter had 3 months left to live. Her body was failing, the clock was ticking, and for once in his life, his wealth was useless. Just when despair consumed him, a quiet voice broke through. The maid he had overlooked for years stepped forward, offering something no riches could buy, a piece of herself. Ethan Marlowe was a man who had everything the world admired: sprawling mansions, private jets, and a daughter who was the center of his universe. His little girl, Amelia, grew up shielded from the world, with every luxury at her fingertips. Yet, within their mansion's endless corridors lived people invisible to their world, the staff who kept their lives running smoothly. Among them was Ruth, a black woman in her early 40s, the maid who had served in silence for nearly a decade. Ruth was more than just a housekeeper. She was the quiet guardian of Amelia's laughter, the unseen hand that ensured her childhood remained soft and carefree. While Ethan dismissed Ruth as part of the background, Amelia often leaned into her warmth, sensing the motherly tenderness Ruth carried in her heart. But life had a cruel way of shattering illusions. When Amelia's health began to falter, Ethan first brushed it off as fatigue. Soon, her spark dimmed, her steps weakened, and her voice grew faint. Countless specialists were called, and no expense was spared. Yet the verdict came like a storm with no escape. Amelia needed a bone marrow transplant. Without it, her days were numbered. Ethan's influence and billions couldn't summon a match. For the first time in his life, he faced a wall even money couldn't move. The mansion grew quiet, its opulence feeling more like a tomb. Ethan spent nights pacing, searching databases, paying for international screenings, even attempting to bribe hospitals for priority matches. Nothing worked. Each day, Amelia grew paler, and her laughter, once echoing across marble halls, became a ghostly whisper. Ruth watched in silence. She had seen men like Ethan her entire life. Men who measured worth in numbers and status. Men who barely looked at the hands that served them. Yet, watching Amelia, her heart ached as if it were her own child wasting away. Ruth had raised children of her own, buried some dreams to put food on the table, and endured discrimination that cut deeper than words. Still, her compassion remained unshaken. One evening, as Ethan crumbled in the hallway outside Amelia's room, the doctor's words echoed like a cruel drumbeat. 3 months, maybe less. Ruth's chest tightened. She had overheard enough. Quietly, she requested a test. She knew it was a long shot, but something inside her whispered it was worth it. Days later, when the results returned, the unimaginable truth emerged. Ruth was a perfect match. But the news carried a weight heavier than she expected. To donate marrow meant pain, sacrifice, and risk. Ruth was already living a life where her health was often secondary to her survival. Yet when she thought of Amelia, those doubts dissolved. The question was, would Ethan accept? The man who rarely looked her in the eye, who never saw her beyond her uniform, now held his daughter's fate in his hands. Could he allow his pride to bow before the maid he had always overlooked? The doctor broke the news to Ethan with cautious hope. Ruth was the match they had prayed for. First, Ethan didn't believe it. The maid? The woman he'd dismissed as invisible all these years? He stormed out of the office, torn between disbelief and desperation. But when he returned to Amelia's room, his daughter lay weakly clutching a teddy bear Ruth had once sewn for her. Amelia's small voice, fragile yet piercing, whispered, "Daddy, please." Her eyes, though dim, shone with trust. Not in him, but in Ruth, who stood silently in the corner, her hands trembling but her resolve unshaken. Something inside Ethan shattered. His pride, his status, his endless wealth. None of it mattered as much as that moment. He broke down, sobbing, for the first time in decades. When he finally lifted his head, he looked at Ruth not as a servant, but as the woman holding his daughter's only chance at life. "Please, save her," he whispered. His voice cracked under the weight of humility. Ruth nodded, tears streaming down her face. Without hesitation, She agreed to the procedure. The surgery was grueling, the hours long, but when it ended, hope flickered back into Ethan's world. Amelia's fragile body began to accept the marrow, and with each passing day, color returned to her cheeks. Ethan sat by Ruth's bedside too, realizing the price she had paid. Not for money, not for recognition, but for love. Weeks later, Amelia's laughter rang once more in the mansion. The halls, once heavy with despair, now pulsed with life. She clung to Ruth, calling her not maid, but family. For the first time, Ethan saw the truth that had always been in front of him. Wealth could build empires, but it was love, sacrifice, and humanity that truly saved lives. Ethan's world shifted. He raised Ruth not as a servant, but as a woman who had given his daughter a second chance. He publicly shared her story, using his influence to fund medical programs for those without access to life-saving care. No longer was Ruth invisible. She became the symbol of courage, compassion, and the power of humanity beyond race or class. As Ethan watched his daughter run across the garden, her laughter intertwining with Ruth's, he felt a humility that money could never buy. For the rest of his life, he would remember the moment his walls of pride crumbled. Not when he lost his fortune, but when a maid offered her marrow and gave him back his daughter. In the end, the story wasn't about a billionaire's wealth or a doctor's verdict. It was about a maid's quiet courage, a child's trust, and the undeniable truth that sometimes the greatest riches come not from money, but from the heart.